Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, learners. This is Dr Likinyo from Political Science Department, the lecturer in charge of POL 121, that is, Introduction to African Government and Politics. Now, in this course, we have different study sections that we're going to discuss, about 6 different study sections. The study section 1 will focus on the nature and problems of African politics, while the study section 2 will deal with colonialism in Africa. Study section 3 is the decolonization process, while study section 4 will deal with neo-colonialism in Africa. Study section 5, succession to power in Africa, while the last study section is military in Africa. Now we'll deal with the study section 1, which is the nature and problems of African politics. Now let us have the introduction. In this study section, you'll be introduced to the nature and various problems of African problems and politics. The political sub-region of Africa are the Maghreb, that is Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria, into bracket. North African and the Nile Valley, that is the Algeria, Libya, and Egypt, into bracket. West African region, the Congo Basin, the Central African countries, and the Eastern Horn or Horns of Africa. Now let us look at the learning outcomes for these study sections. When you have studied these study sections, as a student, as a learner, you should be able to understand certain things. 1, state the similarities between the new African state and independence. Then 2, state the similarities between new African state and independence. Those are the learning outcomes that you need to study and have it in mind, that will guide you in your reading and give you a focus to answer whatever the questions that comes up under the study sections. Now let us look at the differences between new African states and independence. Africa is a vast and diverse continent comprising about 55 independent states, with the exception of Liberia and Ethiopia, which are new ones. This is because most of them achieved independence in the 1960s. Furthermore, there are important differences between them. For example, there is a wide cultural gap between the North African state and the Black African state south of the Sahara exists. There is also an immense divide between stable and prosperous Botswana and states like Angola, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and Sudan, which were torn apart by civil wars, and with the partial exception of mineral-rich Angola, this state faced economic and political collapse. Now, we now look at the similarities between the new African state and independence. At independence, this new African state had several things in common. First, they were ex-colonies, that is, with only a few exceptions such as Liberia, they had been subjected to rule by one or another of the colonial powers. Colonial powers like Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and South Africa in respect to Namibia. They all had a pre-colonial history of their own before the brief over 100 years of colonial rule. Now we look at under still the similarities between new African states at independence. Secondly, they were searching for a new identity as nation state. At independence, they acquired statehood and as members of United Nations with international recognitions. The task remained of widening into a nation, a variety of different people speaking different languages and at different stages of social and political development. According to William Tudorf, 1997, nowhere was the tax more demanding than in Nigeria, which has been described as the linguistic crossroad of Africa. Thirdly, these states were mostly poor, predominantly rural and over-dependent on the vagaries of the world market. However, in trying to industrialize, they faced immense problems of technology and manpower, of the cost of imported machinery and marketing. Now, still under the similarities between the new African state and independence, as we have been discussing, we look at the fourth factors. The newly independent state had an unsettled political culture. The political leadership had little or no experience of operating the governmental system on a national scale. The institutions such as parties, parliament and civil services through which they had to work were also relatively new and weak. Number 5, we look at it in the international context. The new states were no match either diplomatically or materially for the developed state in the 1960s, especially. Most Francophone states took shelters under the wing of their former metropolitan power, that is France. It was only in the next decade that oil weapons gave a few states a significant economic and therefore diplomatic leverage. Also, colonialism has left a deep imprint on the new state of Africa. Thus, there are important differences in the system and styles of administrations among them. For instance, Ghanaian civil servants trained in the Britain traditions will feel more at home in distant Kenya or Botswana than in nearby Senegal, Guinea, or the Côte d'Ivoire, which is formerly Ivory Coast. Furthermore, some of these differences from colonial legacy were reproduced in the external sphere, with the ex-French colony intending to maintain close ties with France than ex-Britain's colony did with Britain. However, as there is always something new out of Africa, since independence, most African states in the 1960s moved away from pluralism towards the centralization of power in the hands of a single party. Others were mostly two-party states. Another post-independence trend was the incidence of military coup in many states. Another was the supplanting of civilian government by military regimes in a large number of African states. Now, still under the similarities between the African state and independence, the question becomes, why did the military intervene in the first instance? Why did it intervene in some states but not in others? Sometimes the military failed or claimed to fill a guardian type role and as custodian of national interest, intervened to save the country from corrupt and inefficient politicians who had brought the country to the verge of bankruptcy. Sometimes, elements of the military had political objectives. This encouraged intervention in Nigeria in 1966, when the principal coup makers sought to put an end to regionalism. Now, we'll look at it. However, some of these coups have, of course, been counter-coups. One set of officials displacing another, thereby reflecting a breakdown in the army's internal structure. Another post-independence trend in African politics was the move away from federal and quasi-federal system of government to unitary structure. Nigeria under civilian rule and the Sudan after 1972 were the only important exceptions to these patterns. Apart from the problem of colonial legacy, many African states faced these problems of subnationalism. Thus, there were problems posed among others. The Ashanti in Ghana, the Bugandan in Uganda, the Igbos in Nigeria, the Eritreans in Ethiopia, the Kantagis in Zaire, now Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Southern Sudanese in Sudan, the Luzi in Zambia, and the Undebete in Zimbabwe. Still, another post-independence trend was more socio-economic than political, but had a wide political repercussions and gave rise to several very important problems. This was the drift to the town in many African states, leading to the growth in Zambia and Nigeria of sprawling, instantly shanty towns around the male urban centers, an increase in number of schools leavers, educated at least up to the primary schools level, for whom jobs were not available because the economy could not expand fast enough to absorb the rising school output. A final trend among others was the determination of African states to pursue an independent foreign policy. This ambition was because the newly independent states in Africa saw that they were politically weak vis-a-vis the Western powers. They did this by forming a regional political union, e.g., the 1959 union between Senegal and the French Sudan to form the Republic of Mali. However, African states continued to assert their national interest, resisting foreign interference and the conduct of their international relations. The summary of this section, therefore, we look at it, the African state mostly got independence during the late 50s and 60s. The number two, almost all African states are sold in independence on foreign exchange for survival. Number three, most African states experienced military rule immediately after independence. Number four, African states tend to adopt the administrative style of their former colonial masters.